Hello and welcome to NB Drives. My name is Nishmanya, and in today's episode, I'm going to be covering road travel from New Delhi to Calcutta. Having driven this route earlier this year while I was covering the Golden Quadrilateral as part of my Atal Yatra series, which, if you want, you can watch in the playlist up there. I'm going to give you all the tips and tricks and insights that I got traveling this route on my own and giving you the rough distances, stops, and anything that you should look out for when you're planning your own drive along this roughly 2000 odd kilometer route. A quick note before we get into this, as I'd mentioned in my last video, which was the Bombay to Delhi road trip, this drive was divided into 3-day sections for each leg, and that holds true for this Delhi to Calcutta leg as well, because I was traveling solo and I wanted the drive to be sustainable by me without any extra driver's assistance. So that means that you can probably end up doing this drive a little faster if you so wish. This 3-day route is more for anyone who is planning to drive completely solo or wants to pace themselves out for the road trip. The first day's drive from New Delhi to Kanpur was a relatively long drive at about 500 odd kilometers to be covered over the day. But because most of it was on expressways, it meant that a lot of distance could be covered in really good timing. And as I'd mentioned in my last video, I had split each of the driving days into 2 to 3 rough halts so that regardless of whether I stuck to the 2 hour driving rest mark or not, I would end up stopping and stretching my legs and taking a break from driving at roughly equal intervals so that I could stay fresh for the long drive. On this day, it was Agra, Etawah, and then Kanpur. And obviously, as I was stopping at Agra, I had to make a pit stop at the iconic Taj Mahal also, as it had been many, many years since I had visited this wonder of the world. Getting back to the drive itself, I had an early start from Delhi, departing at roughly 5:45 in the morning, and I was greeted with a very cold morning as well as a very foggy morning. As you can see in the video, I made my way out of the city, and as I got closer to the Yamuna Expressway, the fog became thicker and thicker. Honestly, until sun up, there was a lot of fog on the expressway, and their dynamic speed system had brought the speed limit down to roughly 75 kilometers per hour, which was quite slow. But because it was so foggy and the driving conditions were fairly dangerous due to the low visibility, it made sense that there was a lower speed limit, and hence I ended up taking a little longer getting to Agra than I had initially anticipated. As the sun came up, the driving conditions definitely became better and more conducive to driving at the regular highway speeds of 120 kph. By the time I turned off the expressway towards the Taj Mahal in Agra, it was about 8:45 and it was roughly 9 o'clock by the time I had made it to the first parking of the Taj Mahal, which is now a fair distance away from the monument as they've created a green zone around it, which only allows electric vehicles to go all the way up to the monument itself. I had a wonderful time taking in the sights of the Taj Mahal, and I really do understand why it's counted as one of the seven wonders of this world because it's truly breathtaking seeing it all in person. And the very detailed history that I got from my knowledgeable guide was also a big plus, as my own knowledge about the monument had faded a little bit, so it was great catching up on that. At around 11, I headed out of Agra again and joined the Agra Lucknow Expressway, which, very similar to the Delhi Agra Expressway, has very large 6-lane roads most of the way through with hard shoulders in case you have any issues or need to take any breaks on the side of the road. Though ideally, you should plan your stops on the designated rest stops that are unfortunately few and far between. And you really do need to be aware of this in case you haven't fueled up, because over the entire course that I drove before I headed off the expressway to Kanpur, I had only one stop on my route, which meant that it got a little tense for me towards the end of my expressway stint as fuel was running low and there weren't any fuel pumps inside. So I turned into the first fuel station I spotted after getting off the expressway and onto the national highway. I reached the city of Kanpur around 2:45 in the afternoon, and it took me almost half an hour to get to my hotel largely because the roads are so narrow and there is so much traffic. Definitely something you guys should keep in mind if you are entering the city, regardless of what time you're entering, because of the traffic conditions, narrow roads, and plenty of roadworks happening in the city. It took me half an hour to cover roughly 15 odd kilometers. And as you can see in the footage, the traffic was fairly unrelenting. Point to note, the first day's drive took me roughly 9 hours to complete. That's on road time from the time I left Delhi to the time I reached my hotel in Kanpur. Though this can definitely be cut down as I had a 2 hour visit of the Taj Mahal and my other stops only resulted in about half an hour. So you're looking at about 7.5 hours of driving time if you avoid Taj Mahal as a stop. The second day of my drive had me going from Kanpur to Bodh Gaya, and since this was going to be an extremely long drive and I did not want to get stuck in the city traffic of Kanpur, I decided to leave fairly early in the morning around 5:30. The second day's drive had me covering roughly 600 kilometers, just shy of that, and my main stops on the route were Khagga, Varanasi, Sasaram, and then Bodh Gaya. And as this was my first time ever crossing Varanasi, I had to make an attempt to at least go and see the ghats along the Ganga River, as it is one of the most iconic and religious sites in our country. It was just something I couldn't at least try to have a look at. The first part of my drive from Kanpur to Khagga was relatively good in the start. When I left Kanpur, it was empty roads and relatively clear weather. But as I got closer and closer towards Khagga, the fog started to set in. And after that, on the way towards Varanasi, also, there was a heavy amount of fog before the sun came up and basically cleared the entire route. So, this is something you should keep in mind if you're traveling in the winters. The fog levels are quite high. I mentioned this on the Delhi Kanpur stretch as well. And visibility was actually so bad at one point that I had to stop and take a break. I ended up reaching Varanasi or Banaras as it is known by only around 12 o'clock, 12:15. And because I wanted to go see the ghats, my stop here, which was initially planned to be only about an hour and a half long, ended up being far longer than that. That was a slight misstep on my part. Although I did get a very good viewing of the ghats as I took this boat ride along the river, and it was actually very peaceful and tranquil. This experience definitely was worthwhile in my opinion, but I would suggest that most people, if you're traveling, maybe allot another day a stop at Varanasi to take in the ghats and not try to squeeze in as much as I did in one single day, because as you can see, towards the end of the day I reached my hotel really late. Now, leaving Varanasi around 3:30, 3:45, it meant that I was back in traffic as I was getting back onto the highway. And because of the sheer amounts of roadworks that were happening in Bihar at the time, especially along the national highway stretches, there was a lot of truck traffic and a lot of regular car traffic also that really slowed me down. And as you can see, there were some sections of just bumper to bumper traffic. But luckily, I kept chugging on, and I actually didn't end up recording a whole lot after my 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock refueling, as I was sort of getting fairly tired and a little burnt out. So I took a long coffee break, and my next clips, I think, just as I entered Bodh Gaya at around 10:30 at night. All in all, it almost ended up taking me 14 and a half hours from the point I started in Kanpur to the point I reached my hotel in Bodh Gaya. And that is partly due to the 4.5 hour halt I took in Varanasi, which in hindsight, I should have probably allotted an extra day for. My overall driving time on the day came to roughly 9 hours spent on the road, and even that consisted of few breaks here and there. It was a lengthy day, and the tremendous amount of roadworks didn't make it easy, but it was still very doable by a solo driver. My third day had me going from Bodh Gaya all the way to Calcutta, which was roughly a 480 kilometer drive as per the maps. And in reality, I think it ended up being closer to 500 kilometers with all the breaks and detours. I had three stops planned, which were Bagodar, Asansol, and Bardhaman before I got to Calcutta. These were all roughly spaced between 120 and 145 kilometers from each other. Due to my late arrival at Bodh Gaya the night before, I ended up leaving my hotel only around 7 o'clock in the morning. And because I had again never visited Bodh Gaya before, I could not help but at least go and have a tour or darshan of the temple and have a glimpse of the Bodhi tree, which is the tree under which Gautam Buddha gained enlightenment. And it was definitely an experience to remember early in the morning with the chants and the crisp air of winter. And the really well maintained site of the temple itself, as well as the tree, it all just culminated in a very spiritual experience. I spent roughly an hour here before I moved on and got back onto the road. And from there, my drive towards Bagoda was fairly stress free as the national highway was not far from Bodh Gaya. Honestly, I think you had to spend only about 25 minutes to get back onto it. And the road conditions were still fairly poor because there's a lot of road work still happening. So my average speed was lower than it was on the Delhi Kanpur day, but it was still relatively traffic free. I had a quick coffee halt at Bagodar at a local cafe just by the highway side. And it was honestly beyond this point where the roads finally started to open up, and I got nice 4 to 6 lane highways that didn't really have much traffic on them. And for the first time while driving in Bihar, it definitely felt like that there were good highway stretches that you could maintain good average speed on. Due to my late start in the morning, I ended up getting to Asansol, which was my lunch stop, fairly late. I got there about 3:30ish in the afternoon, which meant that I had to sort of rush through my lunch and get back on the road, headed off towards Bardhaman. Roughly 2.5 hours later, I was at another coffee halt at Bardhaman, which was planned beforehand, and this was where I was going to take some rest. I ended up spending about 20-25 minutes at this coffee halt just to recoup energy. The sun went down as I was having my coffee, and the rest of my journey, which was roughly another 2.5 hours or so, had to be done in the night time or with the street lights on. This wasn't too much of an issue as I knew that after I got to Calcutta, I had a 1 day break from my overall 6,000 kilometer quadrilateral drive, which, if you want to see more about, you can see from the playlist from the pop up banner on the top right or from the link in the description. The road condition towards Calcutta was definitely in better shape than a lot of what I had seen in Bihar. But these also had roadworks happening, as you can see from the inserts here. And that did impact my average speed and the amount of time taken to cover the distance because it was only about 100 odd kilometers to my final destination in Calcutta. And 2 hours was a fair amount of time to spend on this route. That said, the traffic was fairly manageable as I got into Calcutta. It wasn't overpowering as I thought it would be. That was partially due to my late entry into the city. And I got a good glimpse of the city all lit up, and it definitely had a very unique aesthetic when you're driving through it at night. I pulled into my hotel around 9:30 at night, and this meant that I ended up spending roughly 14 hours from the point I left my hotel in Bodh Gaya to the point I reached my destination in Calcutta. Though you can subtract roughly 3.5 hours total for the different breaks I took as well as the morning temple visit that I had in Bodh Gaya. This meant total time spent on the road would be closer to 10 hours, and the actual driving time would be closer to about 9.5 hours. Doing any major road trip, I always recommend doing your basic preparation for your car before you start a trip like this. And that includes checking your tires for tire pressure, wear and tear, get your car serviced, make sure that it's all checked out by a local service center for a long drive. And of course, carry the essentials that you should in case an emergency arises. So that's a tire repair kit, jumper cables, portable battery chargers for your cars, which can be quite helpful, and other things such as a medical kit, a solar flashlight, and some extra rations and clothes in case you're stranded on the roadside and have to wait a couple of hours for your local RSA or roadside assistance service to come help you out. I'd also highly recommend getting a dash cam if you can, a forward and a rear facing dash cam, but at the very least a front facing one, because knowing our roads, if there are ever incidents that occur, you definitely want some video proof that'll back up your side of the story. All things said, this was an amazing drive experience for me, and despite the roads being some of the worst that I encountered on the whole over the entire quadrilateral drive, this route definitely had some of the most visitable points. And if you do break the road trip down into maybe a 1 day or a 2 day segment instead of going all the way from Delhi to Calcutta or vice versa, you have plenty of interesting halts. It's definitely a culturally rich sector of India to travel through, and you have plenty of options. So do not hesitate. As I've proven earlier this year, you can definitely do this drive completely solo, or you could enjoy it with your family or closest friends. You will have plenty of fun. So definitely consider heading out on the road and doing the Delhi to Calcutta sector this road trip season. I'd also love to know if you guys have any tips and tricks from your point of view, if you've done this drive before, whether the road conditions have improved over the last few months as compared to my drive when I did it in late Feb, early March. And if you have any other advice that you'd like to share with road trippers in India, or give your 2 cents on what an interesting road trip can be, do leave that in the comment section below. I'm sure we'll all be very happy to hear that. Until next time, cheers.